Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive with us.
Excited to be here.
Today, we're diving into the world of language learning and, kind of looking at it through the lens of personal experience.
Yeah, love it.
So we've got this really interesting article from Esma Koskun called About Learning English. She put it up on Medium, and she shares, her personal journey and some tips.
Awesome.
Yeah. So whether you're struggling with grammar right now or just curious about how people learn, I think this is going to be a really cool deep dive.
Yeah, I think there's always something we can pick up, right, from how other people approach these things. Especially something like language learning, which is, universal. Everybody's got to figure this out.
Yeah, totally. And Esma's story, it starts in a way that I think a lot of us can relate to. She talks about this experience of, going through a more traditional type of education system that really prioritized certain subjects, math, science.
Yeah.
But then when it came to actually speaking English.
Yeah, it's like they forget that's the whole point of language.
Yeah. It's like, wait a minute.
Communicate, right.
Yeah,
Actually use this with other humans.
Exactly. And Esma had this, after university, she had this aha moment where she's like, wait a minute, I can't really have a conversation.
Right.
Despite all this time I spent studying. And she even points out how much emphasis was placed on just reading. Imagine that. Just reading.
It's like they miss the mark a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. It's like, you study sheet music forever, but you never sit down at the piano and actually play. Like, are you really a musician?
Right, exactly. It's like, what are we doing here? It's all about application, right? Being able to use it in real life. And it sounds like Esma had that realization too,
Yeah.
That fluency isn't just knowing the rules, but actually using it spontaneously, confidently.
Totally.
Yeah.
And she talks about this. Initially, she kind of had this idea that learning English would be this linear process, master the grammar first, and then you move on to reading, then listening, and then, finally you get to speak. Like climbing a ladder, right? One step at a time.
Yeah, that classic approach.
But it's like, have you ever baked a cake that way?
Yeah.
Like add the ingredients one at a time and never actually mix them together.
Right, exactly. It doesn't work that way. Language, it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
You got to kind of integrate it all, right?
It's holistic. And she talks about this, she recognizes this huge mistake is what she calls it.
Oh, wow.
And starts to look for a better way, a different way.
So what does she do?
That's where these 3 tips come in. And they all really focus on this idea of active engagement with the language.
Love that.
Making it a lived experience, not just some textbook exercise.
Yeah.
And so the first tip is, this is so simple but powerful. Make a sentence. She's like, use the new vocab immediately, even if it's a basic sentence. Just get in there and try it out.
I love that.
Don't wait until you feel ready.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Just oh, I learned this new word today. Let me see how I can, twist it around, even if it's clunky.
Get it out there, exactly.
And I love this tip because it's just so empowering, right? It's like you take ownership. It's not like you're waiting for some teacher to give you permission.
Right, it's all you.
It's like, no, I'm going to learn this word and I'm going to try it out.
And there's actually, a lot of research that backs up that kind of active recall practice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's like science is validating this intuitive approach she discovered.
Exactly. That's so cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking of science, her next tip has this really cool connection to muscle memory.
Yeah.
She talks about focus on pronunciation.
Okay.
And she emphasizes listening to and repeating words out loud, almost like you're training your throat muscles.
Interesting. I like that.
Right. I'd never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when you learn a dance move or you play an instrument, you have to physically practice those movements.
Right. Exactly. Until it becomes natural.
So it's and the more you practice, those neural pathways get stronger and it becomes easier to produce those sounds.
Exactly. And there's this technique called shadowing where you basically try to mimic native speakers.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, you're like,
shadow.
it's a little intimidating.
It can be.
But I can see how it would really push you to pay attention to those subtle nuances of pronunciation.
Right.
And I love how Esma frames it as educating our throat muscles. It makes it feel less daunting and more like a skill you can develop.
Right. Something you can work on, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, on to tip number 3. This one's all about writing your story. Now, this one, it might seem intimidating, especially for newer learners.
But Esma, she makes this interesting point. So she's been journaling in Turkish, which is her native language, for years.
Okay.
But writing in English is still kind of outside of her comfort zone.
Right, yeah.
And she's like, But you know what? I'm just going to do it anyway. I'm just going to write my story.
That's awesome.
And it's not about being, grammatically perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
It's about using writing as a tool to consolidate your learning, try out different structures, get your thoughts down
Right.
in that new language. And it's like this safe space
Yeah.
to play with the language,
Make mistakes.
And this really resonates with me because I used to be terrified to write in another language.
Yeah, I get that.
And then I realized the more I did it, even if it was just short journal entries or emails, the more comfortable I became with expressing myself.
And that's huge, right? To be able to communicate your thoughts.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've covered Esma's background, her realization that she needed to kind of ditch the traditional approach.
Right.
Were 3 awesome tips. But it feels like there's a lot more to unpack here, right?
You're telling me, like her whole approach, it's about more than just these tips.
Right.
It's about this self-directed learning thing, like taking control, figuring out what works for you, having that courage to just try things out, even if you're not perfect.
I love that. And it makes me think about, is language learning ever really done?
Right. Like, is there a finish line?
It feels like this constant evolution.
Yeah, like a journey.
Okay, so let's dive into those themes a little bit deeper. What do you think?
Let's do it. I'm all in.
What really stands out to me, looking at Esma's story, is just how willing she is to, step outside that traditional classroom and just, own it,
Totally. It's like she realized, hey, I don't need to wait for someone to give me permission to become fluent.
Right.
It's in my hands, I can create my own path, my own way of learning. And that's self-directed learning in a nutshell, isn't it?
It is. You're in the driver's seat. You're not just a passenger. You're like, I'm choosing where I'm going. I'm choosing how I'm getting there.
Yeah.
And with languages, I think that's especially important because, there are so many different methods out there.
There really are. And what works for one person might be a total flop for someone else,
Yeah.
Some people need that structure, the classroom environment. Others, they got to immerse themselves completely, like travel, or connect with native speakers online.
It's like that quote about the fish, right?
Okay.
You can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Exactly.
We all have different ways of learning, different things that click for us.
Absolutely. And self-directed learning really honors that individuality. It's like saying, hey, you know yourself best. You figure out what works for you.
It's so empowering, right? But I can imagine for some people, it can also be a bit like, whoa, where do I even start?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It can feel overwhelming, especially if you're used to having a teacher or a textbook telling you exactly what to do.
Right? It's like all this freedom, but then you're like, wait, where's the map?
Right, exactly. So, you've got to find that balance between freedom and structure.
Okay, so any tips for those of us who are dipping our toes into this self-directed learning pool for the first time?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is setting clear goals.
Okay.
Like ask yourself, what do I really want to achieve here? Do I want to be able to just chat with people, basic conversations, or do I want to read novels in another language or watch movies without subtitles?
Right.
And having that clear destination in mind, that's going to help you map out the route,
It's like
right?
planning a trip, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just get in the car and start driving without knowing where you want to go.
Cool.
And once you have those goals, then you can start exploring those resources. And there are so many these days.
Oh my gosh.
Apps, online courses, podcasts. You can even find language exchange partners.
Yeah.
Or just immerse yourself in foreign language media.
You really have a whole world of learning at your fingertips.
You do. But even with all of that, I think self-directed learning can still feel a little daunting.
Okay.
So it's huge to find a community.
A community.
Yeah. Like-minded learners, people who are on a similar journey. You can share tips. You can celebrate successes together.
There's that shared experience, right?
Exactly. It's like you're not alone in this.
And that can make a huge difference for motivation, right?
Huge. It helps you stay motivated. And, it helps you push through those challenges because there are always going to be challenges when you're learning something new.
Right. And Esma's story, and a great example of how powerful it can be to embrace those challenges, right? Remember, she talked about writing in English, even though it felt uncomfortable.
Yes. That's a key part of self-directed learning. Pushing past those comfort zones, embracing those, I don't know, moments.
Right. It's like that saying, life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
Exactly. It's where the growth happens.
And the more you do it, the more comfortable you become with being uncomfortable.
It's true. You build that resilience, that confidence,
Yeah.
and not just with language learning, but in life,
In everything.